Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into some really interesting material. It's the kind of stuff that asks us to trust what we can't necessarily prove, and this is key to do so with a lot of rigor and discipline.
Exactly. We have sources centered on subtle awareness, on crystals, and on this decades-long framework created by an author named Keith Birch. It's called the Maninkari.
A Maninkari.
That's right. And this isn't your typical research material. We're really analyzing a methodology, a way of approaching what the author calls crystalline intelligence.
So our mission today really is to pull out the functional principles, the sort of how-to of it all.
Right. How to practice discernment, how to stay grounded, and what this relational philosophy is that underpins the entire work.
So we're basically looking at a user manual for personal perception, and it seems like it's custom tailored for you, the listener, who might be coming to this not as a believer, but more as a learner.
The author explicitly encourages that. He encourages that distance.
So the core questions for us today are, how does one even begin to build a grounded relationship with something you can sense but can't objectively verify?
And, maybe more importantly, what specific methodology does Birch offer to keep that whole process from just becoming, pure fantasy?
Wishful thinking.
Exactly. And the foundation is set right away. Birch argues that you have to approach this with absolute discernment, absolute personal responsibility.
It's not a doctrine.
Not at all. It's not presented as a universal truth or something that demands your loyalty. The advice is, if an experience brings you agitation, or if it asks you to suspend your critical thinking,
You pause.
you pause, you reflect, you even step away entirely. And that emphasis on self-trust and pacing, I think that's really the first major takeaway here.
Okay, so let's jump into the central concept then, the Maninkari. The sources describe them, always with capital letters, as crystalline intelligences.
And also as beings of light and wisdom that reside in subtle frequencies.
Which sounds very abstract.
It does. And it's so important to understand what that definition means within the source material. They're not physical entities. They're not, historical people.
And they can't be proven by measurement.
No. They're encountered through presence, through resonance, through quiet discernment, things that, exist outside our typical five senses.
So if they aren't physical, if they aren't provable in that way, how does this framework avoid just, devolving into pure abstraction? What do the names and descriptions actually do for the human mind?
They function as a bridge. That's the best way to think about it.
It's braid.
Yeah. The human mind naturally looks for form, for pattern, for definition. If you try to work with a subtle frequency without any structure, the mind either checks out or just dissolves into this, overwhelming static.
I see.
So the names, the qualities, all the relationships that are associated with the Maninkari, they give the mind something coherent to relate to. It allows your awareness to mature.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're mapping an invisible territory.
I found Birch's own story about his early experiences really fascinating, mostly because it was so mundane. It felt very relatable. He talks about sensing a quiet intelligence, a subtle responsiveness, and this feeling of being in a relationship with the stone, not just possessing it.
It wasn't some lightning bolt moment.
No, it was just this persistent, quiet sense of presence that he couldn't just, dismiss out of hand.
And that quiet persistence is the key. It wasn't about drama. It wasn't about intensity. It was the feeling that the stone was somehow responding, not just sitting there inert. And that leads us straight into the methodology required. The awareness, in this context, it arrives quietly. It's often inconvenient. It shows up as a feeling before any kind of coherent explanation forms around it.
Which is the exact opposite of how our culture trains us to operate.
Completely. We're taught to trust what we can immediately measure or repeat or, explain in a nice linear fashion.
And Birch totally acknowledges the internal friction that causes. He talks about wondering, is this imagination? Is this projection? Is this just wishful thinking?
But here's the crucial part.
Yeah.
He says the experience is deepened, steadied, and matured. Not through belief, but through years of careful listening and grounded work. The validator was time.
Consistency.
Consistency and reliability. It wasn't an act of faith.
And this is how he gets to what he calls the mistake of rushing to meaning. Let's explore that for a second.
Okay. So if you force an explanation, if you leap from that subtle feeling to a grand story about what it is, you almost always end up borrowing vocabulary.
From where?
From whatever belief systems or spiritual frameworks are just, lying around, readily available to you.
So you feel a new quality from a stone, and instead of just staying with that raw feeling, you immediately slap a label on it from, I don't know, historical mythology or some common New Age concept.
Precisely. And in that act of labeling, you risk collapsing the actual experience. You distort the perception itself just to make it fit the story you borrowed.
So you stop listening to the stone.
And you start listening to your own expectation. The core discipline then becomes presence before explanation. Just allowing the experience to sit in that uncomfortable space of, I don't know what this is, but I am noticing it.
So noticing is a discipline that is completely separate from believing.
Yes.
And if I'm getting this right, the source is arguing that this capacity for subtle sensitivity it's natural. It's not special. It's not for a select few.
Absolutely. It's a natural human capacity, but one that needs careful management. It needs grounding. It needs discernment just to keep it from becoming either fantasy or just, completely overwhelming.
And this leads to one of the most interesting parts, I think, this counterintuitive role of doubt. Birch frames doubt not as an enemy, but as a friend.
A form of protection.
Right.
It's your critical thinking filter. Doubt keeps you honest. It allows you to hold the experience lightly, so you don't immediately reject the subtle feeling, but you also don't cling to it as if it's absolute truth.
And that space, that gentle holding, is what allows real discernment to grow.
Exactly,
Okay.
because you're constantly checking. You're checking the consistency of your perception against the objective stability of the stone.
Huh.
And when you keep up that discipline of just noticing, you eventually hit this natural cognitive barrier. You get to a point where experience outpaces vocabulary.
That's a great phrase.
Isn't it? The subtle perception arrives as an atmosphere, or a tone, or a sense of movement. And that kind of nuance just doesn't fit neatly into human language.
Which, let's face it, evolved to describe physical objects and actions and, linear cause and effect.
Right. So we need language, but the experience itself defies a literal definition. This is where metaphor becomes essential.
The source has that beautiful line, metaphor is not deception, it is translation.
It's the bridge again. It allows the mind to relate to the subtle experience without making a claim of, literal physical truth.
Can you give us an analogy?
Sure. Think about music. When you say a melody sounds blue, we all get what that means. It conveys melancholy or coolness or depth. We know the sound waves aren't literally the color blue.
But the metaphor works. It translates a felt emotional tone into a conscious understanding.
Precisely. And the Maninkari framework, the whole system of names and qualities, it seems to be built entirely on this principle of relational metaphor.
Because he felt distinct qualities of presence consistently over time.
Exactly. One type of stone reliably brought a feeling of clarity. Another brought stillness. A third consistently challenged complacency. The names are just a way of acknowledging these different qualities.
Like naming different weather patterns.
Perfect analogy. You're naming them without pretending you fully understand their fundamental nature or, fixing their identity forever.
Okay, but wait. If the structure is always evolving, how do you know it's not just, a mutable fancy? Doesn't that lack of a fixed identity create instability? That sounds like a contradiction.
That is a sharp question, and the source addresses it directly. Birch suggests that if a framework cannot change, it becomes a rigid belief system. It becomes something you have to defend, not something you explore. The Maninkari structure is described as a living, evolving structure. And that fluidity is actually presented as a sign of health because it means it can adapt to a deeper understanding. It encourages relationship over command.
So the relationship requires patience and humility and active listening. It shifts the focus away from what you can get from the crystal.
Or force from it.
Right. And toward what you can simply notice through the consistency of just interacting with it. It's an invitation to step out of that transactional mindset and into a reciprocal one. This brings us to the role of the crystal itself. The common understanding, the everyday idea, is that crystals are tools.
Right. They heal, they protect, they amplify.
But the sources here really challenge that view. They suggest that approaching them strictly as tools focuses you too much on the desired outcome, which inevitably limits your perception.
The crucial property of the crystal in this context is its stability. Its internal atomic order is fixed, unlike our emotions or our expectations, which can fluctuate minute by minute.
The crystal's structure stays perfectly consistent.
Perfectly consistent, which makes it an ideal reference point for this kind of subtle work.
So if my perception is wavering, say I'm feeling stressed or distracted, I can return to the stone, and the stone itself hasn't changed one bit.
Precisely. That stability is the perfect counterpoint for testing and refining your own subjective perception. You can return to the same specific stone over weeks or months and ask, is the sensation I'm noticing today consistent with what I noticed last week?
Or was that previous experience just a projection of my mood?
Exactly. Is there a subtle, consistent quality coming from the stone that repeats over time? This supports rigorous discernment, not fantasy.
This also challenges the whole idea of activation. You often hear about needing to activate or charge a crystal with some kind of intense effort.
Yeah, and Birch argues that subtle awareness responds far more readily to attention and consistency than it does to some massive effort or emotional spike.
So it's more like building muscle memory.
That's a great way to put it. You build subtle connections through reliable, repeated return to the work without demanding immediate, dramatic results. Activation implies urgency, attention implies duration, and respect for pace.
And the physical nature of the crystal, that's essential for grounding. The stone's temperature, its texture, its weight, that sensory input in your hand grounds your attention in your body.
Which is a critical anti-dissociation strategy. It prevents the subtle work from becoming purely abstract or some mental exercise that's disconnected from reality. By anchoring the subtle perception back into the body, you keep the awareness integrated,
So the crystal acts as an anchor for awareness.
not an instrument for manipulation.
Yeah.
And that stability, that grounding, that's what allows for the development of genuine self-trust. And that relies entirely on being able to tell the difference between a true subtle experience and an emotional projection.
So we have to spend time differentiating between what the source calls imagination and sensitivity. Can you lay that distinction out for us practically? How can a listener tell the difference when they're noticing something subtle?
Okay, so imagination, as it's defined here, is typically very creative, it's strongly emotionally charged, and it often fluctuates dramatically based on your mood or your desires.
It tells a good story.
It tells a clear, satisfying narrative.
Yeah.
It seeks immediate gratification, that instant aha moment.
And sensitivity.
Sensitivity is defined by its neutrality and its consistency. It's much quieter. It lacks that strong emotional charge or narrative hook of imagination. It often repeats reliably over time, almost boringly so, independent of your personal mood.
And crucially.
Crucially, subtle intelligence does not demand urgency. If an experience feels insistent or overwhelming or highly dramatic, that's a reliable sign, according to Birch, that you are engaging with emotional projection, not pure subtle sensitivity.
So self-trust doesn't mean believing every little subtle thing you experience.
Not at all.
It means trusting your ability to pause, to reflect, to reassess, to allow experiences to stand on their own merits, their consistency, their neutrality, without needing someone else to validate them.
Exactly. And the most reliable sign of genuinely grounded work is slowness, patience. If you feel compelled to act immediately, or if the work requires you to abandon your existing life responsibilities, pausing is the act of discernment.
The subtle work has to integrate with and support life.
It can't compete with it.
This is where those grounding questions become really practical takeaways for you, the listener. These are like litmus tests for whether your perception is grounded or projected.
And discernment is an ongoing practice. It's not a one-time skill. The source suggests you ask, does this experience bring steadiness or agitation? Does it encourage me to take greater personal responsibility, or does it offer me a way to avoid it?
And does it genuinely integrate with my daily life, making me better at my job, more present with my family, or is it pulling me away from those commitments?
And if the answers lean toward agitation, avoidance, and separation, then the work needs to be paused and regrounded.
So what does this all mean for us? This deep dive into the Maninkari framework, it really establishes 3 core pillars. Discernment, using doubt as a friend.
Grounding, using stability and consistency.
And relationship, choosing observation over command. The power lies not in forced definitions or dramatic outcomes, but in honest, quiet listening. Just allowing awareness to mature patiently over time.
And recognizing the validity of completion. That stopping or pausing or just noticing that, nothing happened today, that's just as meaningful as having some profound realization.
The framework supports choice.
Totally. What you do next is entirely optional. True subtle intelligence invites honesty. It never ever demands loyalty.
Which brings us to our closing thought for you. We've established that genuine awareness is built on consistency and patience. So if what is genuine remains, regardless of how much attention you give it, then what persistent, quiet awareness have you been dismissing in your own life?
That gentle pull, that repeated insight, that subtle sense.
Simply because it wasn't loud or dramatic enough to fit your expectations.